You're listening to Engineuity, the podcast that dives into the wonderful world of everything industrial. From the birth of the first combustion engine to breakthrough hybrid power technologies, Engineuity examines just about everything the industry has to offer. The podcast provides a platform for industry leaders, engineers, scientists, and small business owners to educate listeners about past, present, and future industries across the planet.
So today I'm joined by Representative Ron Weinberg to discuss Colorado's Right to Repair bill, which was passed on April 25th, 2023, and signed by Governor Jared Polis of Colorado. It's House Bill 23-1011, officially called the Consumer Right to Repair Agricultural Equipment. Just as a brief overview, and anyone can go read the legislation, but starting in January of 2024, which is coming up in less than 6 months here, the bill requires manufacturers to provide parts, embedded software, firmware, tools, or documentation, such as diagnostic, maintenance, or repair manuals, diagrams, or similar resources to independent repair providers and owners of a manufacturer's agricultural equipment, and also allow those independent repair providers or owners to conduct the diagnostics, maintenance, and repair services on their own equipment. Again, brief overview, encourage people to go read the law, but I'm joined today by Representative Ron Weinberg, one of the co-sponsors of the bill, to kind of talk through it and its implications. So, Ron, if you would just give us a quick introduction of yourself, your background, and how you became interested in the right to repair cause.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Zach. So quite simply enough, I'm a new legislator. This is the first time around. I'm newly seasoned. This past legislation was quite interesting. This one was the first piece of legislation that got put on my desk, so to speak. Originally with, Representative Totona, who was the co-prime, brought it to my attention. She had done the wheelchair, right to repair as well, which it's where it originally stemmed from. And she was looking for somebody who has agriculture around their district to kind of step in and see what people were saying. And the farmers in my surrounding area, specifically, once approached with this issue, were very irate and were looking for somebody to champion a bill that would help speed up the repair of their equipment.
Yeah, I mean, presumably by giving them or third parties more access, so they're not kind of bottlenecked by a dealership, right, on the repairs.
Correct. It was extensively stakeholdered as well. The amount of people that read this bill, read the language, wanted to get involved and engaged in this piece of legislation was quite immense. Being a Republican on this bill, this was a hard one to grapple with as a conservative, right? Because you're dealing with two separate issues. The one issue is proprietary information and software, and what's mine to create is mine to control, right? And I get that portion. I'm a business owner myself. And then you have the other side of which you grapple with, well, I've purchased it, I own it, I should have the right to be able to fix it. So this one, just from a conservative standpoint, was a very interesting one as a Republican legislator, because you grapple with two fundamental issues that in technicality conflict with each other.
Yeah, a right to repair is certainly a larger issue than just agricultural equipment. I know that's kind of one of the markets where it comes up. The consumer electronics side is the other market where right to repair kind of comes up, but it has made for some kind of interesting bedfellows in terms of like political arrangements, right? Because you do have these, it's a really interesting mix of like, what does ownership mean and what rights do you have, of something that you have purchased. And also if you're building and manufacturing something, how tightly can you hold that stuff, and so I'm excited to get into some of those details because it's a really interesting topic. Can you tell me some of the specific concerns? I know you talked about just the speed of repair of the agricultural equipment being brought to your attention from local farmers, but are there other issues that they're concerned about in terms of longevity of the product, or the ability to keep things in their fleets past the time might be supported, or are there other intentions here besides just the speed of repair that farmers brought to your attention?
Honestly, that was the main premise, which was they need to plow, plant, and harvest fields, right? Farmers often don't have time to wait for a manufacturer designated repair service, leading to calls for the freedom to seek help from a trusted source, whether that's themselves, a family member, a friend, right, an independent repairer, or a dealer. The main issue was, I had farmers tell me two things. The one, and I'll respect anonymity, but the first one told me that he had literally gone to search for overseas software that would be able to plug in and fix it himself because he was so irritated. And this software is coming out of China and Russia. You don't know what it is.
Questionable.
Yeah. And that's the length they're going to. They're voiding their warranties already, right? Without anybody knowing it. And the second farmer was stating his tractor sat at the dealership, and he had to put it onto a big trailer. He had to haul, because it couldn't function, couldn't move. He had to haul it out to that service shop. He had no backup. Spent millions on this tractor. And it just sat because there's a shortage of technicians or whatever it is.
Yep.
There was another farmer who said that he had a guy come out, type in the code, that it was a false positive, right? Sensor code. And he was off by one number, like trying to mimic it and mirror it. And he called the tech and said, look, can you just give me the code so I can get on with what I have to do? And the tech's like, unfortunately, I cannot do that. And I'll come out. And he came out in a couple days. So, those farmers are down and out.
Yeah.
Till that gets fixed.
Yeah. I mean, we know when there's work to be done, there's not a lot of patience for people to wait on machines to get repaired. It's something that we live with every day in the industry.
And it's not $100 machine. It's, in my industry, when a computer fails, fine, you go to Best Buy, go to, Office Depot. You can't just go and replace the thing. This is a serious machine with a lot of money behind it.
Yeah.
So it's very important that it be done in a fast nature.
Well, I want to talk about what specific equipment the law applies to, because this is a reasonably narrow law and segment of off-highway equipment. Just for the listeners to know about it. I mean, again, retro repair is a bigger issue, but the law in Colorado specifically applies to agricultural equipment. And I have some questions around the definitions. I don't want to pin you into a legal interpretation here, but I did want to just go through kind of how it's defined in the law and then try to get some clarification about the intentions behind the law, because I do think there's going to be some gray areas, especially thinking about some of our applications and customers. There's definitely going to be some gray areas that will have to get sorted out probably through the courts, right? But in the law, there's a set of equipment that is specifically included as agricultural equipment. These are tractors, combines, sprayers, tillage equipment, right? I think some of the big obvious stuff that people think of as agricultural equipment. There's a group of things that are explicitly excluded. So like vehicles designed for transportation, power sports vehicles like your jet ski does not count kind of thing, right? And then there's some language in there that does get down to the primary intent of the manufacturer. So if the primary intent of the manufacturer was for that piece of equipment to be used for agricultural, it's considered a piece of agricultural equipment, right? So I think some of the gray areas there are equipment that might not have been primarily intended as agricultural equipment, but still get used on the farm a lot. Thinking like front loaders or bulldozers, skid steers, things like that have maybe a construction purpose or exist in multiple market segments. Even if you go look at a lot of equipment manufacturers, they might advertise or market that piece of equipment in multiple market segments. How should somebody that makes a piece of equipment that's used in multiple market segments understand this law? Do they need to be prepared to comply, or what was the intention behind defining agricultural equipment that way?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's all done through stakeholdering. So talking to the representation of CAT or John Deere, that's where they feel comfortable. Also, groups and organizations who are seeing this bill go through legislation. You've got committee, you've got second reading, you've got thirds. There's a lot of talking to do, and the evolution of this bill is all with what can be fair to the markets in hand. Yeah. And these definition changes came through the legislation from organizations that said, look, we see what you're doing. We think this would make it better, and it would at least put some areas where you're not going to handcuff everything. And this is what stakeholdering came up with is, and I think that's the only reason Representative Titone and myself agreed to it, was because everyone had seen the writing on the wall. There's a problem that demands legislation fixed. I mean, I hate putting laws onto people. There was a certain need for an industry, specifically in the state, Colorado, where farmers were getting ripped out of these negotiations and deals, and even taking this one back, these definitions back to the farmers, they didn't see how it would be a concern either. And you also got to bring into mind, are these forklifts or front loaders or ATVs and stuff like, which ATVs excluded, obviously we did that at the end as well. How often do those break, and how quick do those get fixed? Yeah. So in essence, essentially, what is going to be a problem, right? Are people going to bring this up to say that I want to fix this myself? How easy is it to fix? How often do they break? Those questions have to be brought up on a regular basis as well. And from what we were doing, we don't see that those would even be brought into the picture, because that wasn't the concern initially. It's the tractors that are broken down, not getting fixed.
Right. Okay. Well, I think it's going to be an interesting piece to kind of see how it plays out, right? We've seen lots of other legislation, from like emissions regulations to safety regulations and things that tries to like define equipment in different ways and categorize equipment in different ways. And of course, none of them are perfect, and they all have their gray areas. So I think that's one part of the law that's going to require some shakeout in these first couple of years once it's on the books, and try to figure out how that's going to be interpreted, so that people that have equipment that may have an agricultural purpose or may have an agricultural use need to understand their compliance with the law, right? It's going to be an interesting thing to see shake out.
And that's always an irritating thing with legislation. I mean, I'll admit to that. I can't stand the fact that there's so many unknowns, right? Always, and then there's an immediate problem. So you have to almost bite the bullet at some point. It's to fix the immediate problem, address that, make sure that is nice and clean, and then rely on the court systems if there's going to be room for abuse or the unknown, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, it's the typical legislative process. It's there are no perfect definitions under the law, right?
100%.
So the requirements for the bill, the bill mostly lays out requirements for the manufacturers of the equipment. They're the ones responsible for making the documentation, the software, and the tools available to independent shop owners and equipment owners. But like the way that that stuff is to be made available is not necessarily specified under the law. It's kind of left up to each manufacturer to decide what that means. So are there is the intention for the mothership engine manufacturers or equipment manufacturers to make that directly available to shops and consumers, or are they still allowed to leverage their dealer network in the area to provide that information? So my local tractor dealer, can be the outlet to provide that information to me, or does it kind of require that direct connection between the consumer and the factory?
It's a great question. House Bill 2310-1011 does not specify the method for making the required information and resources available to independent shops and owners. It simply states that the manufacturers of the agricultural equipment must make parts, tools, manuals, documentation, digital access, embedded software needed to complete repairs at a fair and reasonable price. What we had seen and gotten feedback from as well is that there was a lot of bloated, inflated prices where somebody had to Google something, they see it coming in at such a low number, and then when they're getting charged, the dealers, so the people themselves looking at, trying to get to the bottom of whether something is fair or right from a dealership. As such, it can be inferred that manufacturers have some flexibility in how they choose to distribute the information and these resources. However, the information must be accessible to both owners and independent repairers.
Right.
If a strategy that solely relies on a dealer network makes it such that independent repairers or owners are unable to access repair materials, OEMs will need to work with their dealers to make sure that this is fixed. Many manufacturers already make limited software tools available directly to the consumers.
Yeah.
Now they'll need to do the same for full software tools to make sure that farmers have true fixing freedom.
Yeah, so there's a good point in there that when I've been talking about this bill with other people, I think some people read the requirements and they say, oh, so just, now they have to give everything away to users, and to be made available does not necessarily mean given away for free. So there can still be charges for special tools and software access and systems access, right?
Which you can guarantee there will be charges.
I'm sure there will be, but I think it's a good point of clarification that being made available means being commercially available. People have the ability to purchase these things. I guess you can make it available for free in the case of like a parts book or something, but it means commercially available, not just for free.
100%. And I'm glad you brought that point out, because that's what I try to hit home is you're still building a business element, and there's still a support for businesses with this to where the charging can offset, and that's
right.
It's very good to know and understand.
Yeah. So short story on your answer there, that the specific method is not described. So whether that's come in and get it over the counter, or if it's available on a website, or call the 800 number, or whatever method the manufacturers choose is not specifically prescribed by the law. They have a lot of freedom in determining what the method is, right?
Correct. And that was stakeholder. The one thing I take pride in, and with Representative Tatone as well, is the stakeholdering done to listen to everybody throughout the process was really extensive. It wasn't, okay, this is what we're doing, close the door, we're done.
Yeah.
It was throughout. We were making changes and edits all the way up until thirds before Senate. It went to the Senate.
Yeah. And that type of industry feedback, I think, is invaluable in trying to craft the law and making sure that you're hearing the voices from all aspects, because everyone's going to have a different opinion on what it should say, or making sure their voice is heard. So it's an important part of the process there. I want to ask kind of a selfish question next, because in the off-highway market, we would be tier one supplier, right? We're not a manufacturer of equipment, but we supply engines, which is usually a very highly technical and complex component in a lot of agricultural equipment. And most small and medium-sized manufacturers of agricultural equipment go source an engine from a supplier, or go source hydraulics, or go source even sometimes third-party controllers and things from suppliers. And the manufacturers of like engines or hydraulic systems in some cases do not necessarily make those embedded software tools freely available or available to the equipment manufacturers. What are the obligations for kind of tier one suppliers to provide diagnostics when they're not the equipment manufacturer? So engines are a really good example there. But does the engine manufacturer obligated to provide the diagnostic tools and software to the market through this law, even though they're not manufacturing equipment?
Sure, and it's a slightly difficult question because it's a different industry. But ultimately, this law is about leveling the repair playing field. It's about making sure that farmers and independent mechanics have access to the same tools that manufacturer-affiliated dealers do. That's very important to digest. Whatever repair materials are available to dealer technicians need to be available to independent fixers. That's an economy booster. That's a job builder. And quite frankly, when things that we are buying are failing and cannot be repaired, we've got to open up the industry to competition, right? That's just what it is. And from a conservative standpoint, that's how I view it.
Okay. Again, this might be something that ends up getting kind of sorted out over time, right, as we understand what the impacts of the laws are. But I know there's going to be a lot of small and medium manufacturers that are saying, I would love to make engine diagnostics available to my customers, but I don't have them available to me. So how can I make them available to customers? And that's where I know that the large engine manufacturers specifically are already working with some industry and trade groups to answer these questions. But their obligations under the law, I think, are a place that are going to need some more clarity as we get further down the road. But I think the intention's clear, right? You just want people to be able to fix stuff. It's pretty simple.
That's literally it. I wish we could have had it. I wish that could be the bill.
That's like the Schoolhouse Rock version of the bill. Yeah.
It's a good version. I wish more legislation was that easily said.
Okay, I wanted to talk about some of the compliance side of things here, because I think there's important clauses in the law about compliance and the impacts on liability, especially when it comes to heavy equipment. I know equipment manufacturers are extremely safety conscious, right? They go to great lengths to make sure they're building a safe piece of equipment with lockouts and safety features. In a lot of cases, software plays a big part of those safety features. So, if the operator comes out of the seat, turn the clutch off to the spinning blades of death, or making sure that we're doing things in software that keep the operator of the machine safe. But and so when I talk to equipment manufacturers, some of their immediate cringe areas are like, if I open up the software to customers, that's going to give them the ability to turn off or disable or go around these safety features. And we think we have the same concern about emissions performance too, on the engine side, right? Being able to turn up the power on an engine or do things that violate the emissions regulations. Can you talk about what the kind of the liability chain is in the law, and what liability equipment manufacturers either are able to hand off or they don't retain with some of these changes being accessible to end users now?
Sure. No, that's another great point. The Colorado law has specific limitations concerning safety features, emission regulations, and other areas. It does not authorize independent repair providers or owners to make modifications that would deactivate a safety notification system, except as necessary to provide services. It does not allow the use of tools to change settings in a manner that brings equipment out of compliance with any applicable safety or emissions laws, except, again, as necessary to provide service.
Yeah.
It also explicitly prohibits activities that would evade emissions.
Right. I did see that, yes.
Yeah. Copyright, right?
Yep.
Trademark or patent laws, or engage in any other illegal equipment modification activities. So in terms of whether equipment manufacturers are expected to change the functionality of these tools to prevent such, the law does not explicitly mandate this. This law is about making sure the farmers can fix their equipment. Illegal modifications will still be illegal. Ultimately, I trust our Colorado farmers, if equipped with the right repair materials, will make right decisions. And again, I hate to bring it back to conservative principles, but it's self-responsibility and self-reliance. There's a job that needs to be done. I don't think the bill is built around trying to mod out so that we can destroy the environment. I think it's more modded for farmers to do their job, which is all they're asking to do.
Yeah, that's why I think it's important to note that those types of things are very explicitly called out in the law, that they're not allowed. But I think if I'm putting myself in the seat of an equipment manufacturer that developed those tools, if you're servicing a piece of equipment through a captive dealer network, those tools might be pretty broad ranging, right? You have control over the training and the technicians that might be doing the work. So could they turn off a safety system or change emissions performance, in the software? Yeah, maybe. But now that you have to open those tools up to other people, you might end up restricting everybody from that kind of stuff, or putting in extra safeguards in the software for everybody to prevent some of that stuff that you just don't want to be able to happen, right? And I think that just is going to be a different mentality if you're writing software for one of your people to use, and then you're writing software for the general public, right? It's just two totally different views in terms of capability and usability and everything else. So I think this will have some impacts on how equipment manufacturers build those tools out in the future, and there probably will be some changes coming down from the way they build that software.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. I would hope while they're doing it, they're engaged in the conversation with everybody that's involved. And I think, when this bill first came out, or was even being whispered, people were quickly trying to change MOUs and go through everything they can to avoid getting into legislation, which honestly, I would have preferred that the dealers fix this issue themselves.
Yeah.
It's not what happened. Even with all the adjustments to the MOUs and the quick response to, now that they see legislation's getting involved, then they started, trying to do something. So I would hope with this itself, they would speak to the public again and just engage them as much as possible, especially since the amount of money is so broad. It's large. It's a large amount of money.
Yeah,
that's being debated.
Well, I think we have started to see a lot of manufacturers sign those memorandums, essentially agreeing, at least in principle. I think a lot of the main tenets are the same that we're starting to see from some of the large manufacturers. A lot of the tenets are the same as what's in the law. Of course, that's not exactly what's in the law, but there have been a bunch of those memorandums getting signed by people. Those don't, having a memorandum of understanding with like an industry trade group doesn't get you out of needing to comply with the Colorado law, right? It's not a get out of jail free card, but and it's also not unusual for industries to kind of volunteer to do stuff if they sense regulation on the horizon or other rules on the horizon, right? But I do agree with you that legislation has kind of forced the hand of some of the manufacturers in terms of saying, okay, yeah, we'll do this. Please don't pass any more laws because we've said we'll do this. But do you see those memorandums as forward progress? I know that you're not a national legislator in terms of writing legislation for the whole country, but if a few states pass legislation that results in the industry voluntarily opening up for the whole country, do you think there's a chance that avoids 50 different state legislations that do similar things in every state, or do you think that that's kind of an inevitable march?
It's a great question. I would hope that whatever will come forward from this, because this is the first of its kind, and I think national legislators are already looking to blanket. I would hope at least that legislature, national stage, would discuss with each state locally and find out if it has to do that or not. Because if you start blanketing for no reason, you're gonna have abuse of the law, right? So the conversation needs to be had. This was a problem specifically in Colorado. Mm-hmm. This is how we specifically were on the side of the people, on the side of the farmer, on the side of industry in this state, and it was all through conversation. So, I hope any legislator that's even thinking about floating this to a national stage would have a chat with myself or Representative Tone, as well as the individuals within the states that would have no need for this to be enacted in their state.
Yeah. It's going to be, all I can say is I think it's going to be interesting. talked up top about how right to repair is not just, this is not an agricultural equipment problem, right? The right to repair is an issue that impacts a bunch of different industries, right? And not just equipment either, but other industries. So it's been an interesting last 5 or 6 years anyways, to kind of see the right to repair gain ahead of steam to the point where we're actually seeing like legislation and actually seeing, some voluntary action, but it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. Are there any plans or discussions or preliminary legislation in Colorado that extend the right to repair to other, even other equipment categories or other industries?
Do you think, is the question that will we write more legislation to do other things?
I don't know if there's a roadmap to kind of to address, say, construction equipment, or I know that this bill started out as a bill covering powered wheelchairs, like you mentioned earlier, and it was extended to include agricultural equipment. Seems like there's a framework to add on other categories as needed. I don't know if there's work being done or the expectation of work being done to extend it in the future in Colorado, or if this is kind of where you're stopping for the moment.
It's a great question. Representative Stone has led the charge on this repair. I've come along for the ride with this one, not with the Power Wheels or wheelchairs one that she did prior to this. I haven't heard of anything moving forward next. In fact, it's a question we get asked often: is what's the next thing? And how I answer is very simply, where is there a problem? I'm not going to forward legislation or create laws if there's not an issue. So, if there is genuinely a problem with construction equipment, I haven't heard it. And if there is, I'll champion it. I'll ask, Tone to join me again, but if there's no need or demand, I would hope that we wouldn't create law.
Yeah, I mean that's a reasonable answer. I mean, I think if and probably not a bad message to people in adjacent industries too, which is don't let the situation on the ground get to the point where it's a big enough problem to need legislation to fix it, right?
Sure.
And maybe, to tie the two questions together, maybe some of this voluntary action through these MOUs and memorandums will address a lot of those concerns without the need to rise the legislation.
I would hope so. Creating legislation that's ineffective or that doesn't do anything to fix the issue is just bad legislation, period. Yeah. So I would hope in a dream world that nobody would do that, but it doesn't always happen.
Well, as we kind of count down the clock towards January 1, 2024, I know there's going to be a flurry of activity amongst equipment manufacturers and other people in the industry to, get compliance plans together and kind of game plan how they're going to meet the requirements of the law. I think, is there a message that you would give to those equipment manufacturers or people that are busy preparing to meet the law? What do you want them to have in their head as they're kind of getting ready for January 1st?
I'm a business owner. I do IT for a living. The only reason my business has been successful is because I listen to my clients. And I would highly suggest that companies that are getting the same complaint or the same concern being hammered down over and over and over again, don't just ignore it. Because honestly, that's how we got to this point, and I don't think it's good for anybody. Government is forcing, right? I hate that. Like that's not the intention here. It's that we had to now get involved because there was genuinely an issue of client being ignored, and I think the simple fix to this is the companies to go out and say, hey, so what is actually happening? And look at the service records. How long are tractors sitting in the service shop? What is going on? And why are things not getting repaired? and rather, I would rather champion, trust me, I would rather champion law that would incentivize more repair agents out there. I would much rather put taxpayer dollar and effort to building trade schools to where people can literally go and build an industry out of this. But that's unfortunately not where it went. So as people are preparing for January 1st, I would hope that the conversations now are being had with the people that are complaining.
Yeah.
And talk to them as to what they see as a solution, as a fix. Because, if you think about it, the farmer and the corporation, they can resolve this without any of this law. All the corporation has to do is fix this stuff. I mean, literally, it's that easy. And if it's not being fixed, figure out why. So that's what I would, if I was the owner of a company and this was happening to me, I would go to the client. I would find out what exactly is happening. Where is the miscommunication? Why is this designed wrong? And when I say designed wrong, the design of something's broken, it gets in, it gets fixed, it gets returned. Where's the breakdown in that? And I figure if they can fix that problem, they won't have to worry about any of this piece of legislation.
Well, I mean, as I hear you talk through that, I think there's a couple different categories of issues. That there's some of the issues in the right to repair that are kind of long-standing of manufacturers locking out or locking down capability from customers, that just not giving them the ability to do things that maybe it seems obvious they should be able to do, like clear codes or reset codes and things like that. But the other, I'm going to put on my equipment dealer hat for a second here, because I know I work with a lot of equipment dealers, and those guys tell me consistently their number one problem is just getting enough technicians to get the work done, and having the workforce to be able to to repair the equipment in a timely manner. I don't know a single manufacturer that likes having down equipment. They are all highly focused on getting it repaired as quickly as possible, but the labor and workforce issues I know are more of a recent issue. The other issues around right to repair are long-standing issues that go back decades and decades. But the labor and repair stuff is recent, and I think any of those dealers would also tell you is like, but yeah, please make investments in tech schools and trade schools and help us get the workforce developed, because there is tons of work out there that needs to get done and not enough people to go out there and do the work. So, and both sides of that equation have got to get balanced out at some point.
Sure, and I 100% agree with it. This is the point to that would be is you need to help your customer get his stuff done. That's the ultimate. So do whatever's necessary. If you have a shortage of technicians, then have the conversation in a boardroom of, okay, you know what, maybe we should just release some of these codes. They're just ridiculous. If it's a false positive sensor, and it takes 5 pieces of code to fix it so that the tractor can continue on. Have that conversation, and from what everything that I understood is those conversations, number one, were not being had, and that means in essence, just again, that's a violation of what you're offering, right? You cannot sell something, say I'm the only one that can fix it, and then not fix it.
Right.
That's bad business practice. I would never. My business sells warranties, right? 2-year. I get 2-year, no questions asked. You can throw the thing against the wall. I will replace it. Now, I wouldn't offer that if I couldn't uphold, right?
Right.
So it's a situation, I think, where this has been happening for a while. People have been dealing with it. They've been getting by. The point of older tractors that don't have these computer chips have been getting bought, and now we're just going backwards in Engineuity, right? Which see what I did there?
Nice. I appreciate that.
The point of this is to move forward, and the technology makes things better and easier, but it has to work.
Yeah. And
if you know anything about computers like I do, computers suck. I mean, they break down. They're susceptible to viruses. They can, there's so many variables, especially with farming equipment, with what's happening with the weather, what's happening with usage, how much it's used. I mean, we know everything about technology. If you know anything about technology, it's vibration and heat, destroy it. Like that's just what it is. So these things are is it set up for success or set up for failure? And we have to really come to the room and have that conversation. And that's where, nobody really approached me from the corporate side to talk about it. They were just flat out against it. And I would prefer to have the conversation of, well, if this has been such an issue, what have we done? And why have we gotten to a point where now we're writing laws? And again, I'm 100% against government force me to do this until there is a fundamental violation or a breakdown of client and consumer. And it clearly exists here. And they can fix all the problems before January 1st, and this would not be an issue to corporations by January 1st if they simply went to the farmer, made provisions to incentivize people, even farmers, to fix basic things by themselves. And I want to make one more point before I ramble on, because the very big point here is that there are small things happening to these tractors that can be fixed in seconds. And that needs to be understood and pointed out. We're not talking about the wheels fell off. And, we're talking about a simple code that can be entered in to get the farmer moving on with the day. And that's not being addressed. And that's where this comes from. It's not engines breaking down. It's not transmissions blowing up. It's basic stuff that can be fixed in seconds that are being literally hoarded and hidden from people that just want to farm and do their work.
Yeah. Well, I in closing, I want to kind of flip my last question around backwards and say, what if you're a farmer or an equipment owner or an independent shop owner, what would you tell people to expect January 1st, right? I mean, I don't expect that everything's just going to be sunshine and rainbows in January. We're going to have to go through a transition process. So what would you tell them to set their expectations as starting in January in terms of, what to be able to get or how to communicate with manufacturers and start this process of exchanging information and tools?
Sure. My set of expectations to everyone would be, first of all, read the bill.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Start there. Read the bill. Read what it says. If you don't understand it, then you reach out and ask to get clarification. That's where I would start first and foremost. Then secondly is, without even hesitating, contact your dealers and talk to them and understand, get your opinion out as to what is the problem, what's going on. They need to hear your story. Unfortunately, from what I understood, is these farmers that came to public comment in the legislation, that's the first time any of these corporations had heard these stories, so they say. And it was a big wake-up call for them. I would hope that they're pursuing contacting the dealers and explaining what's going on. That way they can give them a heads up and know what's happening. Then secondly, the legal teams over at the big corporations, they know exactly what's going to happen January 1st. And if you have a tractor that's broken down, I would start calling up now and seeing how they're going to handle it. What's the turnaround time to fix? What's going on? What's the sensor code error that needs to be cleared? Contact your dealers and be a partner in this process. That's another thing I want to emphasize is this is not an attack. We need to turn this into, we want to help each other. You want to help everyone. We've got a problem, right? And the problem is the same on either end, whether you're the farmer or whether you're the dealership. Something is broken, it's not working, it needs to be resolved. That's dealership ownership of an issue, and that's farmer ownership of an issue.
Yep.
And if we can come together on that very simple point, that we're both trying to do the same thing, which is get on with the day without interruption, because no business, right? No business wants to be hounded by clients. And how do you not get hounded by clients? Is make sure the stuff works.
Yeah. Perfect place to end it. Representative Weinberg, I want to thank you for taking the time to come talk with us and talk through your legislation and some of the intentions. I think the hearing the way this legislation was intended is an important part of understanding how people should be interacting with it. And just thanks for taking the time to come on. It was a pleasure to meet you. And let's look forward to January 1st.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. Very, very good show.
Right.
Thanks for listening to Engineuity. We record and release a new episode every month. Be sure to follow us at Engineuity Podcast on Instagram for updates about future episodes and industry news.